I love Georgia Stein's show, but what I don't love is that promo, because whenever I play it, it makes me feel hungry. I just go, time for food. And it's not time for food because it's only 20 past 5. So it might be just a little light snack maybe, just to keep you going. On the Drive show yesterday, we were talking about the ACT Labor Party releasing its pokies policy and promising that it will slash the number of poker machines in Canberra by nearly 3,000 over the next 2 decades. They're also talking about fast-tracking cashless gaming in the city's clubs and a few other things that they would try to do. Craig Shannon is the Chief Executive Officer of ClubsACT. I wonder what he thinks of the Labor Party policy. Craig Shannon, good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks for having me today.
So what do you think? It seems like definitely pokies is going to be an election issue.
Well, it's certainly a devastating blow for us as an announcement of policy, particularly given that it was dropped on us on Monday. And I understand there's a proposal to have this moved in 2 weeks' time in the Assembly, and there's been no consultation on the detail of this with either ourselves as the peak industry body or with the clubs generally who will be affected by it. We actually think this is a blow to the Canberra community more broadly in the long-term application of it.
So there was no indication given to you, no warning at all. This was going to be law. That this is what they were hoping to do.
No, we were advised on Monday that this was the intention to proceed with this policy in about 2 weeks' time in the Assembly. And at the meeting, I made it quite clear that if we were talking about election policy and this was going to be something that might be discussed after an election was conducted, then we would have been in a much better position to consult and be more available to consider all of these options than having it dropped on us on Monday.
And so what you said it could be the death knell. What will it actually mean, do you think, for the clubs?
Well, I mean, in a longer-term prognosis on a 2045 basis, I think we will have very few clubs as they stand today left in the ACT. The reality is there's no way to offset these revenue streams and the timeframes that are being projected here. I think it's farcical in some respects to suggest that by doing this it will have an expansion of social and affordable housing. That is a long-term outcome. There's no quick hit in development, particularly in this town. We've had major problems with EPSDD getting developments up in regards to social and affordable housing in the ACT over the last few years, and that's an acknowledged problem across the board. Planning and getting fast outcomes in the ACT has been a difficult problem up till now. I don't see that changing in the short term. It's really about how do you replace these revenue streams to allow clubs to continue supporting sports and other things across the ACT that provide the social fabric.
The government does offer, though, payments in return for handing back pokey licences. Are they not enough to cover the loss?
No, those machines are not being compensated at market value, and that's been part of the difficulty in some of the clubs giving them up. While we are happy with voluntary surrender, and a lot of clubs most clubs have substantially reduced their reliance on poker machine revenue in terms of their overall revenue streams. But at the end of the day, this announcement at the moment of 500 machines per term, there is no way to effectively offset that revenue and to allow clubs to continue as they are today supporting community groups, providing low-cost meals and other things to their members without that kind of revenue.
As you mentioned, the end date for this policy is 2045. Surely that gives you enough time, or the clubs enough time, Craig Shannon, to diversify, to find other sources of income?
Well, that's an ongoing process, and it has been for some time. So people forget that we've already had a reduction of poker machines in the ACT of approximately 30% since 2015. We're the only jurisdiction that can claim that, and we think that there's been an effective management and working relationship between government and the industry to try and achieve these outcomes. But when you are announcing upfront an imposition of that kind of reduction, when you can't guarantee a revenue replacement in matching that, then I think there are real issues as far as the sustainability of a lot of clubs.
Mm. Do you think you'll get a lot of community support, though, Craig Shannon? I'll read you a text that's just come in. Extracting $180 million a year and $1.3 billion over 10 years from club patrons through the pokies are extraordinary numbers. The gambling harm done is hard to justify for a cheap beer and snitty. Why don't they just turn the machines off, says this texter.
Yeah, well, that's quite a puerile comment, because at the end of the day, clubs across the ACT community provide substantial community outcomes in terms of the provision of community sport and providing venues where families, for instance, can go and have cheap, affordable meals as a collective. A lot of that stuff is subsidised by that revenue. But those figures in regards to the revenue generally, that's a gross figure in terms of what clubs generate, and it doesn't include the money that goes back directly in community contributions or taxation to government. So we're not talking about that kind of money going directly into the pockets of clubs to provide cheap schnitzels. At the end of the day, what we are talking about is community sport in this town, which is fundamentally underpinned by the resourcing, from the club industry, in part subsidised by poker machine revenue. And no one's suggesting any vehicle for that to be offset. So this will become an issue for all taxpayers if they want the social fabric of Canberra to be maintained. How they're going to offset those losses of revenue that clubs will sustain from this to allow things like community sport to operate.
Well, yes. I mean, I don't think anybody would deny the fact that the clubs do provide a lot of other good resources and good facilities for the community. The problem is, and you and I have spoken about this before, Craig Shannon, is problem gambling is an issue, and there's concern that the clubs aren't doing enough or could be doing more to try and protect people from harming themselves and from becoming addicted to the machines. Is there some way that you can step up in that area to maybe get a bit more sympathy from the broader community?
Well, this is the problem. We keep conflating these two debates, the poker machines and the harm minimisation debate. We work very closely with government on harm minimisation, and we have a good story to tell in Canberra. In fact, the government itself assessed that there's approximately 3,000 people in Canberra that cover all gambling types that fit the clinical description of someone who's a gambling addict, if you want to put it that way. That's quite a small number in relative terms in the overall population. So harm minimisation is one thing, but if you actually... This is creating a prohibition model at the end of the day where poker machines will effectively become outlawed in general terms. And why is gambling the only addiction type where apparently increased regulation and restriction is a method of harm minimisation when it comes to illicit drugs and otherwise? We are deregulating and we're actually providing pathways to interventions and harm minimisation that are completely at odds with this sort of policy framework.
Do you feel like you've been unfairly picked on here, Craig Shannon?
Well, I think there's an unfair obsession with poker machines in terms of harm minimisation and the approaches to it. We have an approach to harm minimisation that is effective and it's working in this town, but you don't conflate prohibition with harm minimisation. That will just drive people to online wagering, for instance, and across the border to New South Wales as they really want to gamble, when at the same time our club provide pathways for intervention for someone who's identified as having gambling issues. Where are they going to go for that kind of intervention if they are just prohibited from accessing to clubs and they decide to cross the border or hop onto their phone to gamble?
Just on that, we also mentioned yesterday, we talked about the fact that the Vikings Club has put in plans to build a new club just over the border in Jerrabombra, possibly up to about 150 machines there. What do you make of that, and do you support what the Vikings are doing?
Well, the Vikings group, like most of our clubs, are looking at diversification options. All of the clubs in the sporting field generally have exposure across the border. They play regional sport competitions or otherwise. There's obviously a club at Queanbeyan already that the Vikings group have been involved with for some years, which is a bowling club. It's not, and you know, we have this Canberra bubble, if you want it, Ross, that surrounds the ACT in terms of the cross-border sort of relationship between populations. I don't see any reason why that major and developing community out there should be denied access to social venues like a licensed club. I don't see anything inherently wrong with what the Vikings are proposing, and I understand it has a lot of support out there. But at the end of the day, if people just don't like clubs, they don't like clubs. I mean, I can't convince them otherwise of that. Yeah,
we did get a lot of callers yesterday. To be fair, Craig Shannon, we had a lot of callers not so much upset with the club, but the fact that there was a lack of consultation. They're a bit concerned about a club rocking up on their doorstep that's going to be open from 10 a.m. to 3 a.m. They feel they haven't been part of the consultation process. Do you think, Craig Shannon, if the Labor Party follows through on this and the Greens follow through on this and there is a continued clampdown, do you think more clubs will look at moving across the border to provide the same sort of services?
I think the long-term prognosis, Ross, is this debate continues in the way it's going at the moment, is the club industry in the ACT will effectively cease to exist as it exists today, which is a fundamental part of the Canberra community fabric. And if people don't want that, well, that's obviously a decision for the Canberra community. But if they do want venues where you can take your family for an affordable meal out one night, or you do want to have a meeting, or you want to have a wedding reception, or you want to have a live music venue, those sort of things are propped up by the revenue streams that clubs currently receive. And if those revenue streams are going to continually be attacked and there's no offset to that, well, we're going to change the nature of the way the Canberra community socialises and exists day to day. And I'm happy if the government want to pick up the tab for all the sports that are funded currently by community clubs. But at the end of the day, no one's put that on the table yet.
There are clubs. I mean, if you look at the Polish club, they got rid of the gambling machines, the poker machines, and they're doing quite well. Can't clubs still survive And it's a question Martin's asked on the text line. Why do clubs need gaming machines? You can still be a profitable club, can't you, without gaming machines?
No, I actually think it's a completely ridiculous suggestion. The Polish club is not a club like the clubs we're talking about. It operates, from what I understand, largely on volunteers. It's not necessarily open 7 days a week. And I don't know that they actually go out there and sponsor either community groups or sporting organisations with substantial amounts of money. And people often refer to WA as an example of a similar style of club. In WA, any of the clubs involved in sports are propped up by local government funding and a lottery scheme. At the end of the day, when you're talking about the engagement of a club as a 7-day-a-week employment environment for Canberrans that provide a full suite of services, you can't do that off the back of serving food and beverages. That just doesn't, that's not viable.
We'd have to leave it there. Craig Shannon, I do appreciate your time. It does, as you and I have talked about, it's going to be an election issue, so I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the days and weeks to come. But thank you for your time.
We're going to need to.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Craig. Bye-bye. Craig
Bye.
Shannon, who is the CEO of ClubsACT. A few people texting in on